Hello and welcome to Education in Focus. This is Brennan Clary, K-12 editor at Chalkboard News, standing in for Dan McCaleb. Here with me today is Tom Gantert, who is a contributor to Chalkboard News frequently, and he's also the investigative editor at the Center Square. So, Tom, today we are talking about a poll that was from the Center Square, so this is appropriate, right? The Voters' Voice poll, which was conducted by Noble Predictive Insights. And it found that Americans are more dissatisfied than satisfied with the quality of education at their local public school. It also had interesting results about how Americans feel about school choice. So I want to get into both of those topics today. And I'd love to have, a conversation about what that means, especially going into the 2024 election cycle. I mean, we've already seen in some, Republican primary debates that candidates are fired up about education. So I'm interested, what do you think is going on with this? And I'd love to hear your position and what you've kind of learned from the coverage, and I can talk about it as well. But just from your angle, what are you seeing in the, education polling that was done for the Center Square?
Well, start with the poll on dissatisfaction with public schools education. Like 41% were dissatisfied and 39% were satisfied. And so you ask yourself, well, what would they be dissatisfied about? And I'll give you a really good example. Detroit Public Schools. Okay. So there is a testing called the NAEP. It's done every 2 years. And
the Nation's Report Card.
Right. Called the Nation's Report Card. It was done in 2009, 2011, 2013, 2015, 2017, 2019, and 2022. In every one of those years, Detroit Public Schools finished last. Okay. So they were dead last among the largest school districts that are evaluated. Now, from 2017 to 2021, Detroit Public Schools total funding went from $621 million in 2017 to $841 million in 2021. So it went up $220 million in 4 years. Okay, yet they're still finishing dead last despite the increase in funding. The other thing is the school district has historically rated the last 3-4 years that 40% of its teachers are considered highly effective, and the other 59% are effective. The two lowest categories, which would be minimally effective and ineffective, were about 1% combined. So what you have is a school district that's academic results are among the worst in the country, that's getting more and more money, and thinks that its teachers are, doing significantly better than the rest of the state in terms of teachers. So there's kind of a lack of accountability there. And that's kind of a good example of what people are frustrated about. When you look at some of the nationwide, the headlines were that in June, that 13-year-olds in the Nation's Report Card testing had some of the lowest math and reading scores in decades. So, and we know they're getting more money. So I think there's a lack of accountability that's leading to some of that frustration.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Another, interesting thing from that poll was by party, that Republicans expressed much higher dissatisfaction than Democrats. And Mike Noble, who, was interviewed for this, and the founder and CEO of Noble Predictive Insights, which conducted the polling, he said that the issue is flipped depending on who's in power, essentially. So Republicans think that, because a Democrat is in the White House, then education, they will sort of rate as going in the wrong direction. So that's an interesting thing that he pointed out, is that, there is sort of this flip-flop, and that, that occurs when the White House changes from Republican to Democrat and vice versa. I also thought it was interesting you're bringing up, some of these regions, and that it was interesting. He said that the southern region of the United States was more dissatisfied with the quality of education than, the Northeast region, which was the most satisfied. So he said the Northeast region of the country had the highest satisfaction rate with the education system. And one thing that I think is interesting is, it seems like a lot of the book removal proposals are coming from southern states. I mean, there was a report from PEN America, which is, a free speech organization, they call themselves, and they found that, southern states like Florida and Texas saw the highest number of removals of controversial books. Do you think that is playing a role in some of the, dissatisfaction that parents are having with the school system in their area? And is that a driver for school choice initiatives?
Well, I think they play into each other. So I'll give you my take on this. So when you look at universal school choice, you see that it's a party-oriented position. 50% Republicans are in favor of universal school choice. According to the poll, 18% of Democrats are not. So when people talk about universal school choice, what are they really talking about? There's really three options. There's charter schools, there's homeschooling, and then there's schools of choice within the public system. Okay. Most of the opposition is charter schools. And, well, why is that? Why would there be so opposition? Because nationwide, about 10% of the charter schools are unionized. Okay. And we know that unions overwhelmingly support liberal democratic causes when it comes to political donations. Okay. So every charter school teacher that is created by an increase in charter schools means it's taking money out of Democratic PACs and super PACs, So, in Michigan, the state where I live, only 9 of the 300 charter schools are unionized. The other thing about universal school choice that I think that has happened is that with the dissatisfaction of what happened during the pandemic and schools being closed. And that led to a lot of disgruntlement among parents about what type of education their children were getting in remote learning. And, the National Home Education Research Institute estimates that there's been a 10% growth in homeschooling every year. So when you talk about the opposition to school choice, the thoughts about why they're against it are political because it's a Democratic versus Republican thing. I mean, if your charter schools are not going to be unionized, that means less teacher dues going to teacher unions, and that means less political donations to Democratic political candidates. So that's why the split is 50% Republicans and 18% Democrats.
On satisfaction?
Yeah,
right?
on not satisfaction, on universal school choice.
Okay,
why there's such a big gap between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to universal school choice.
Sure. Yeah, that 50% of Republicans support universal school choice. And I think, that you bring up the pandemic. I think that's interesting. That's what I heard when I talked to Robert Enlow, who was the president and CEO of EdChoice. And he was just saying, that parents want these different kinds of education options and basically that this is here to stay in some form, even on both parties. I think I brought up to him, there are some Democrats who are saying we need to, and you mentioned this, that the public school of your choice, like that is becoming, sort of a more prominent talking point for even Democrats. They're not supporting vouchers or public money going to private schools, like in some states, like we've seen that in Florida, and we've seen that in a number of states this year of universal school choice bills and sort of like an explosion almost of these kinds of things. But he said, the era of one size fits all education is dead. So I'm just curious, what do you think that looks like, going into the election? What are your thoughts on like what's driving the school choice push? And I think we probably have to wrap up here pretty soon, but if you have any kind of final thoughts on either poll.
I think basically the pandemic has created a lot more disenfranchisement with public schools, traditional public schools. That's led to more homeschooling, and I think it's led to an understanding of wanting charter schools as a choice to public schools. Also, when I brought up the city of Detroit, I think the city of Detroit public schools have been a train wreck for 20 years, and they've been getting more money, and it's time for results or a different choice.
Yeah, and that's something that even Mike Noble brought up, that the framing of the issue of more options for parents, and he said, who doesn't want a choice? So like he said that the framing of the school choice debate does lean more toward Republicans. So that's a very interesting conversation that we had today, Tom, and I appreciate your time on this. That's all the time we have for today. Listeners can keep up with this story and all stories related to K-12 education at chalkboardnews.com. I'm Brendan Clary for Tom Gantert. Thanks for listening, and please subscribe.